Okay, so if someone were to ask you as a registered dietitian what you would say it means to be healthy, what would you tell them?
I would say that being healthy is when you feel your best emotionally, physically, mentally, and it's a place that you can see yourself living for the rest of your life. And I think that last part is really important because we can talk about healthy behaviors, but if those are not behaviors that you can engage in the rest of your life in a way that's not going to be high stress, then it's not actually healthy. And so it's looking at how your health promoting behaviors impact you emotionally, how they impact you mentally, the mental strain and stress that they put on you, and then, of course, the physical aspect. So it's not just how you look.
Yeah, and I noticed you didn't say anything about weight or really any numbers at all.
No, no, I think that the weight is definitely not an impact on. It's not the only piece that can impact your health. In fact, I think it's probably the smallest piece of impacting your health. There are numbers, sure. Like I like to look at vital signs, I like to look at lab values, and that would be under that physical umbrella. What's your blood pressure? What's your heart rate? What are your lipid panels and your hemoglobin A1C? Those are numbers that we'll look at to determine physical health. But I don't look at BMI, I don't look at weight as impacts on a person's health.
Awesome. And I've seen you write about this idea of the relationship that we have with our food, and was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think I had not heard of a relationship with food in my education until I'd already become a dietitian. But this idea of having a relationship with food essentially is just like any other relationship. You have experiences with it, you have to make decisions about it. Your experiences with it impact how you feel. And so a relationship with food is essentially creating this approach to making food decisions in a healthy way. It's kind of like when you're not necessarily compromising, but you're needing to make a decision in another relationship. You're going to think back on previous experiences. You're going to think back on, ways it made you feel. And it sounds kind of wild, but the same thing happens with food, especially because our food is connected to emotions and it is connected to experiences. Food can be nostalgic, it can be comforting, it can mean different things. And so food does have a relational impact in our lives. When I think of kind of like an unhealthy relationship with food, it's anytime, food shouldn't be stressful. So anytime making a food decision or an encounter with food is stressful, that's when we can kind of look at, is this an unhealthy relationship? Of course, if you eat a food and it makes you sick, that's a negative experience, but that doesn't necessarily need to be a negative relationship. That can show you next time I won't eat that food.
Hmm.
But anytime a food decision or a food experience causes stress, that's a red flag to me as this is probably an unhealthy relationship with food.
Okay, perfect. I'm really curious about this one. What are some common misconceptions that maybe you hear in your profession that people might have about being healthy?
Ooh, this is a good one. I think when people think of being healthy, it is an all or nothing kind of approach. You're either fully working out every day and eating quote unquote clean, which is a term that I don't like utilizing, but eating just like protein and vegetables, that's being healthy. It's this extreme approach. Being healthy doesn't have to be extreme. In fact, I would argue being extreme is unhealthy. We
Hmm.
want to live more in that gray middle area where we can experience and enjoy all things. One, because variety, we do know that variety impacts our gut health and that impacts our overall health, but it also impacts the other two pieces of health, that emotional and mental um, side of things, because extremes are really hard to live in forever.
Hmm.
Um, I think, carbs get a really bad rep. I'll just say that right away. Carbs are unhealthy, and that is just not true. Carbs are necessary. It's the overconsumption or the underconsumption of anything, water, carbs, fat, micronutrients, macronutrients, that can lead to being unhealthy.
Hmm. That's really good. Yeah, I like that a lot. I just jotted down a few things that I hear people say a lot, and I would love to just hear your reactions to them if that's okay.
Of course.
So when people say it's just as simple as calories in, calories out, is there any truth to that?
So, yes and no, and here's why. Energy balance does matter, but it's not the whole story. We're not as simple as just a math equation, and I think when people say it's just a math equation, it's just calories in, calories out, that negates the fact that we are human beings and we have other factors. We have hormones, we have environmental factors, we have stress levels, we have so many things that can impact your daily energy expenditure that we can't measure. That when you simplify it down to just, oh, just eat less calories than you burn, how many calories are you burning? The only way we actually know is if we use something called indirect calorimetry, which is very expensive and it's mostly in hospitals for ventilated patients, to be honest, or maybe professional athletes. Um, but we even notice when that test is being run that our calorie expenditure changes minute to minute as it's measuring the test. And so to say it's just calories in, calories out ignores all of these other pieces that we need to look at. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What about someone that sees a diet, an exercise regimen, something work for someone else, and thinks, well, if it worked for them, it should work for me?
Oof. So my first thing would be define works because we so often see quick fixes and we don't see the 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 years down the road where now they're still struggling with the weight that they regained or they're not able to keep those habits consistent. And so my first thing would be define what works. The second would be we're only seeing a tip of the iceberg. I love social media. I hate social media because when you see someone post transformation pictures, you're not seeing the tears that they cried, the, extreme behaviors that they went to, the long term effects of that. Sure, maybe someone does in the context of lose weight. I lost weight in college. What people didn't see was that I have weak bones now in my wrists and my spine from under eating and, potential impacts on fertility from that. And so define works would
Hmm.
kind of be my main takeaway there.
Yeah, and one thing that I was reading just both on social media and your website is it sounds like you emphasize a lot just that people have individual needs nutritionally. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes, thank you. That was going to be the second piece of that. What does work for someone else may not work for you because you have genetic differences, you have historical differences, you have environmental differences. And so I always say, like, you could eat the same, work out the same as someone else, and you probably wouldn't look the same as them
Mm-hmm.
because you're different. And so you need to figure out nutritionally what feels and works best for you. So thank you for highlighting that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is the last kind of misconception, and then we'll keep moving here. Um, what would you say if you hear someone refer to um, earning your meal or working off your dessert or that type of give and take relationship with our food?
Yeah, we have that burn to earn mentality. If I want the pizza, I need to go to the gym and burn it off. It's such a toxic kind of thought process because it insinuates that we need to do something to justify eating. And the reason that is problematic is simply science. When you wake up in the morning, your body is in energy demand. It needs energy in order to function. We look at something called like your resting energy expenditure, and that takes up 65 to 75% of your daily energy needs. Then you have your non activity thermogenesis, which is walking around, to the grocery store or picking up your kid or whatever it is. You expend energy there. That's another 10 to 15%. Then we have the thermic effect of food. When you eat and digest, you are burning calories in order to digest the food. That's another 10%. The very top of your energy expenditure is exercise. And so when we say that we need to use exercise to justify the calories or justify eating a certain food, we're negating the fact that our body needs energy regardless. Um, and so that's definitely something that I talk about. You know, we don't need to use exercise to burn off or earn our food.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to ask, if weight isn't um, I would describe as big of a metric as I think a lot of people make it out to be, what are some helpful things to focus on in terms of trying to be healthy? Like what could people focus on besides weight?
Ooh, yeah, really good question. So I like to focus on energy. I like to focus on sleep. And then if you're looking for more of like a numerical value, take a look at your lab work and your vital signs. Where is your blood pressure at? Where is your blood sugar at? What about your lipid panels? What about, your fasting blood sugar? These would be things to look at and see, is there a way that I can optimize them, because from a nutrition standpoint, because those are going to be better indicators of your health status than your weight. And if in the process of working on lowering your lipid levels or balancing your blood sugar or whatever, your body changes, then your body changes. But it's less about the weight piece and more about the health promoting behaviors. I always like to say, what can we add to our nutrition? Can we add more fiber? Can we add more vegetables? Can we add, things in? And those tend to be ways that I measure for my clients. Did you get in fruits and vegetables today? Did you drink enough water? Um,
Yeah.
Other than just the scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just as a side note, I feel like in preparing for this, a lot of people, as they've like commented on um, social media posts and news stories, it has been very like weight focused and things like that. And I'm really glad you said that because I want people to see that there's a lot more nuance to that. And secondly, I'm really glad that I did get blood work done before and after. I think that'll be really interesting to see. But I know this is kind of your wheelhouse. What would you say to someone who feels like they need to be in the same shape that they were in as a high school or college athlete?
Oh my goodness. Yes, this is definitely my wheelhouse. You know, I can blanketly say this, but it's hard to believe it, but your body is allowed to change. In fact, we want it to change because that indicates that it's able to adapt to new circumstances and it's able to serve you in a new way. So often we think, as adolescents or like young adults, we have a very lean body type and we don't have as much fat on our body. Well, fat is hormonal, it is an endocrine tissue, and it functions in so many ways. I think we sometimes forget, at least for women, that 20 to 30% body fat is kind of ideal. That's the normal amount.
Hmm.
We misconstrue body changes as a failure when I really do think we should look at them as a sign of life. If my body is able to change, it's able to adapt, that's incredible. That is showing me that it's surviving. We want to be survivable, we want to be adaptable. Um, we unfortunately live in a society that preaches you need to stay the way you looked from 18 to 22, and that's kind of your ideal health. But that's not always the case either.
Hmm.
And so I do try and encourage this mindset shift to recognize that body changes aren't always a bad thing and to go back. Let's default back to looking at, well, what are your behaviors? And are those supporting, you know, health? Because sometimes we do just look at the appearance like when we were 18 to 22.
Yeah, and I know I fall into the trap of looking at people like the example that comes to mind is like the actors in Marvel movies and thinking like that's how they exist at all times. But am I right in saying that like they like dry out and they kind of have to like ramp up for filming? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. And even, like I don't do macro coaching and things like that, but even in the macro coaching world, they talk about how you can't be in a fat loss phase forever.
Hmm.
That's not helpful. Your body needs some maintenance, it needs some stability. And so, we can't always be chasing weight loss or fat loss. That's not healthy either.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. When people talk about how often or how many meals you should be eating, people talk about 5 meals, 3 meals, intermittent fasting. Do you have any advice or thoughts when it comes to that?
Yes. So I always recommend getting back in tune with your hunger fullness cues and recognizing how often you're hungry. So I do say that meals should last us about 3 to 4 hours at minimum to make sure that we're getting enough energy. If our meals aren't lasting us that long, then they probably weren't big enough meals. If they're lasting, 6 to 7 hours, then maybe it was too big of a meal. That tends to be the normal blood glucose curve. But if it's 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day, kind of goes back to one of the previous questions where it's really individualized. Some
Hmm.
people thrive off of 3 solid meals a day. Some people do need more frequent meals. Intermittent fasting is not something I usually recommend purely because it's an extreme, right?
Yeah.
Especially for women, there can be a lot of hormone implications to only eating at a certain time period and for fasting for so long. But it's not something that might be sustainable. So I always recommend your lifestyle. Is it something that's going to fit your lifestyle? Is closing your eating window at 6 p.m., support your corporate lifestyle when you have client dinners at 8 p.m., whatever it might be. So, that's not something I usually recommend, but it is very individualized.
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like intermittent fasting is really trendy right now. I feel like I hear that a lot of people are like, yeah, it's the thing to do.
It's super trendy and there's a lot of research coming out. We really only have research on men and men with like chronic illness like diabetes or things like that. And so
Oh, okay.
we are seeing some benefit there, but the question now is it actually the fasting window, or is it that they're just eating more in alignment with their energy demand?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of question marks, not a lot of concrete answers to support it yet.
Okay. You've mentioned this a little bit, but like the 30-day cleanses, the fad diets that can be really popular like keto, Whole 30, and I'm going to lump in there like dieting apps. Any general guidance when it comes to things like that?
Yeah, these short-term things like Whole 30 or keto or things like that, my question would be, okay, what happens after?
Hmm.
Because we're so excited about doing it. We're like 30 days to reset. Yeah, let's go. What happens on day 31? What happens on the keto diet when you do add in a piece of bread, or it's your birthday and you want to eat cake, or that sort of a thing? Cleanses your lungs and your liver and your kidneys. They cleanse for you enough. We don't need to go to these extremes. It goes back to that question of, can you see yourself doing this for the rest of your life? The second question is, do you want to do this for the rest of your life? And if the answer is no to either of those, it's not something that I would recommend, because we want to build sustainable habits. And I think that's something people tend to shy away from, is they're looking for the quick fix. They're like, oh, 30 days, I only need to commit to 30 days. Cool. They do probably lose weight and then they gain it back plus some after, because their body has gone through shock. They didn't develop any skills to continue through after the 30 days or after the cleanser detox. So those don't tend to be my favorites. I do more focus on, can you make sure you're getting in fruits and vegetables? Can we increase your protein intake? What about, um, making sure we're consuming enough water? It's not the sexy thing to do. It's not there's a lot of marketing for diet apps and things like that that's very appealing, but it's not always sustainable.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I very intentionally did not call this project the Taco Bell diet because I didn't want, if I do manage to maintain a level of health, I didn't want people to like think that's the thing to replicate. Like I'm trying to be very clear. Like this is an experiment, and
Yeah.
like you said, not in any way sustainable. um, Okay, real quick, counting calories. Or I know you've talked about like calories and the math equation in general, but counting calories and or macros.
Ooh, yes. So the first thing that I will say is that there is something to be said for having awareness to your energy intake on both extremes. We don't want to overconsume our energy needs, but we also don't want to underconsume. So having some awareness can be helpful, and for some people, tracking can be beneficial for a short period of time. It's not meant to be a lifelong thing. Now, the thing that I will say is that our food labels are so inaccurate. They're up to
Hmm.
20%, actually legally, they can be up to 20% either higher or lower than listed on the food label. That is by
Hmm.
law. They're allowed to have a 20% margin of error. So, how do you know how much you're actually consuming? We don't. It's kind of a guess, which is where understanding general rough numbers might be helpful, but we don't need to be so exact. Now, macros takes a different approach, and that's looking more at the composition of your meal. How much protein, how much fat, how much carbs. And while I have respect for the premise of macros, I'm not going to sit here and weigh out my food to show me how many grams of everything I'm consuming. So I think that they tend to take it to the extreme. We can utilize the awareness there, but I'm not a huge fan of using them for the long haul. I'd rather talk about meal composition, understanding hunger fullness levels, what happens to our blood sugar when we eat this versus this, and educating there, than using calorie counting or macro counting as kind of like a long term solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of connecting the dots of what I'm hearing you say, I can think about people I know that have become kind of obsessive to the point where counting affects the relationship they have with their food, where it becomes
Yeah.
this guilt or stressful thing because they're thinking about the numbers and what impacts those will have.
Yeah, I have had friends who have brought like food scales with them to restaurants to measure out how much, how much chicken are they eating, how much rice are they
Mm,
eating, and that is not, we're missing out on living life. You are literally putting life on pause to weigh out your chicken at a Mexican restaurant, instead of engaging and living, and that's where it comes back to the emotional and the mental piece as well. Um, is that healthy for you?
awesome. Okay, does fat free equal healthy?
No, it doesn't actually. I am pro full fat,
Hmm.
and many dietitians are. And the reason is because the macronutrient fat actually helps us with micronutrient absorption. So vitamins A, D, E, and K cannot be absorbed without a fat source. And so consuming full fat dairy products, full fat cheese, full fat dressings, it actually benefits micronutrient absorption. And the other piece of that is fat equals fullness, because fat is going to be the most energy dense macronutrient. It keeps you fuller for longer. If you notice that your meals aren't lasting a long time, maybe you do need to add more fat. Like there's no harm in having, half an avocado, or sometimes depending on your needs, a full avocado with your meal. I think I know, like, if you came from like the 90s era or the fat free era, that was a
Yeah.
huge thing. We've since found that that's not healthy, and that actually leads to usually over consuming simple sugars and kind of like processed sugars more often. So I am team add fat to your meal.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue because I saw a documentary once that talked about that fat free era where everything was just fat free, but what got replaced, and correct me if I'm wrong, in a lot of those was like processed sugars. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, give me a couple quick thoughts on sugar. I've kind of heard like this idea of don't drink your calories, and I know that like sugary drinks can be a huge source of that. But how should we think about sugar?
Sure. So it comes down to consumption, right? We sugar gets a bad rep because it's associated with things like diabetes and, excessive weight gain and abdominal adiposity and all of that. But it comes down to consumption. Sugar itself is not going to cause all of that. It's the overconsumption of it. And so if you're consuming, a soda, one soda is not going to cause you to have diabetes. If you consume multiple sodas every single day, maybe we're going to have an overconsumption of added sugar. But it also comes down to what else are you doing in your day to day eats? Are you eating enough fiber, which helps to manage blood sugars? Are you eating enough protein and fat, which also helps to balance blood sugars? We we like to put the blame on one thing, and we like to
Hmm.
pinpoint like, oh, it's sugar is causing the problem, when we're looking at, well, maybe it's just a lack of eating enough fruits and vegetables. Maybe we need to eat more fruits and vegetables than kind of demonize sugar. The last thing I'll say on that is, sugar is what your body runs off of, and there's there's a lot of noise with especially keto being so popular that no, your body can run off of ketones. Our bodies were not designed to run off of ketones. That is a backup default plan. If we don't have enough energy, then we transition to ketones. It's kind of a last ditch survival effort. Your body functions best when it has enough sugar to function. And so, where we get that sugar from, how much we consume, that all plays into it. But we don't need to be fearful of sugar, and we don't need to be fearful of sugar sweetened beverages either. It's how much are you consuming and what else are you doing with your day?
Hmm. Okay. Any thoughts on diet soda? Is that worth it or
If you, I always say if you really enjoy it, like if you like the taste of diet soda, then sure. Is it adding to your life in any way? Oddly enough, I really like the taste of Coke Zero. I like it better than Diet Coke and I like it better than regular Coke. I don't know why. It has nothing to do with the calories for me. It's just the taste.
okay.
So if I'm gonna drink a soda, I tend to opt for that one. Same thing with like sugar-free sweeteners like at Starbucks, like sugar-free vanilla or things like that. If it's not going to bring down the experience, then sure, I'll use sugar-free vanilla syrup because to me it tastes almost the same and I like it as much. And that's one way that I can, you know, be mindful of my added sugar intake, but you don't have to drink diet if you don't like it.
Okay. Awesome. Sweet. Well, let me just ask you a couple specific questions about my experiment. People have made jokes about me, to put it bluntly, getting diarrhea from eating Taco Bell. And so, as a dietitian, what are some types of foods I can be looking for to help keep my bowel movements regular?
Oh, yes. So with Taco Bell, beans. Beans are going to help because they're high in fiber. They're also going to help promote a healthy gut microbiome. So anytime you have the option to add beans to a burrito or whatever it might be, that would be my recommendation. Anytime you can add veggies, like if they're doing lettuce or tomatoes or something like that, that's going to be helpful too. And I don't think Taco Bell has like a whole wheat tortilla, but if they have a wheat tortilla option, adding in like a whole grain is going to be helpful too. You actually, if you do the corn, like if you do the corn shells or corn tortillas, corn is going to be helpful with keeping regular bowel movements as well.
Okay, that is really helpful. So appreciate that.
Of
Um,
course.
a lot of Taco Bell items have, and I see this at Chipotle and other restaurants as well, a sodium warning on that. Is there anything that I could do to mitigate my sodium intake, whether that's drinking more water or avoiding certain types of foods? How should I think about sodium?
Yeah, so unless you have a history of high blood pressure, we don't need to be overly cautious of the sodium intake. It's really the people who are already predisposed to having a heart condition or high blood pressure or kidney issues, things like that. But some things that we can do is you can consume more potassium as well. So tomatoes are rich in potassium, potatoes are rich in potassium, bananas, kiwis, that sort of a thing. So if you do have the option to increase your potassium intake along with drinking enough water, that can help with the sodium intake to balance it out.
Any thoughts on or any advice you would have for how I should think about exercise as I'm doing this? I've heard the phrase you can't outwork a bad diet, and that's definitely not my desire to, exercise to an unhealthy degree. But any thoughts on how I should think about exercise as I'm, maybe consuming food that isn't at the top of everyone's health list?
Well, again, it's going to kind of come back to moving so that it feels good for you. We don't have to burn to earn our food, even when you're eating something like Taco Bell. But what forms of movement are going to feel best for you? So we know that doing a combination of strength training and cardio is what supports metabolism the best. Building lean tissue, so building lean body mass, building muscle, is what supports our metabolic health the most. So while some people might think, oh, I need to do a lot of cardio to burn off the calories, it's actually building more lean tissue that's going to support your metabolic health regardless of what foods it is that you're consuming. So maybe focusing a little bit more on the weight training actually during this to build lean tissue to support your metabolic health.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That is really cool hearing you say that because I feel like I don't know. I don't know if this is part of that like 90s mentality or maybe from the 80s, but I feel like cardio has always been tied in popular culture to burning fat. But what I'm hearing you
Yeah,
saying is that kind of building your lean tissue, your muscle, helps you have a higher resting metabolic rate. Is that accurate?
correct. You
Okay.
got it. Exactly. When we lean tissue muscle is more metabolic at rest. And so it helps you to continue using more energy even when you're just sitting down. Then cardio, you're burning more maybe in the moment, but you don't have that delayed burn like you do when you build lean tissue from weight training.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. I think one thing that I want to communicate through this documentary or kind of help portray is thinking about food more so as fuel for our bodies. So, with that in mind, what types of foods can I be looking for, either at Taco Bell or otherwise, just in general, that will be particularly good for fueling my body to be active and to do movement that I enjoy?
So, if you're talking from like a sports nutrition standpoint, sports nutrition 101, briefly is carbohydrates before your workout. So, something that's more simple carbs to give your muscles energy, and carbs and protein after your workout to refuel and rebuild the muscle that you just broke down. Outside of that, your meals, you want to make sure that there's carbs, fats, and proteins. So, it's a well balanced meal. Sometimes we can have a little bit of lopsided meals where it's heavier carbs or lighter on, protein or whatever it might be. So, really looking for how can I optimize carb intake, protein intake, and fat intake at my meals is going to fuel you the best.
Okay. I love that because I think that idea of like what's going to fuel me the best helps me have a much healthier view of my food versus kind of the inverse, which would be, how is this going to impact like my waistline or something like that.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Awesome. Just kind of to wrap it all up, I was just looking through some of the like quotes and blurbs you had on your website, and I hear you talk about um, enjoying food in a balanced, nutritious, delicious way, ditching the guilt, and finding true confidence in your body. If someone is hearing that and wants that type of relationship with their food and their exercise, where could they start? What would be a good first step in that direction?
The first step would be to let go of thinking of foods as good or bad. We don't want to think of them as good or bad. We don't want to attach that morality to them. We want to look at food just as food. There are foods that are more nutritious, there are foods that are less nutritious, right? We have more nutrient dense foods and less nutrient dense foods, but we don't have good or bad foods. That's really where we get ourselves into a lot of trouble because if we eat a cookie, for example, and we think, oh, this is a cookie's bad. I'm being bad for having a cookie. Now we have this guilt. Now we've just condemned ourselves for eating a cookie. And it can spiral into, well, I messed up the whole day, so I might as well just throw caution to the wind. And what we want to do instead is to look at, like, okay, let me balance out having more nutritious foods and having some, maybe less nutrient dense foods, but separating needing to identify foods as good or bad. That's the first thing. If you've accomplished that and you're now looking at food as neutral, I always like to ask the next question of how is this going to serve me? Sometimes food serves me physically for energy. Sometimes food serves me emotionally. Sometimes it serves me socially. So there are times where I'm eating chips and salsa, and maybe I don't need chips and salsa, but I'm engaging with, um, friends and family, and it's serving me socially. There are times where ice cream is really good and I'm enjoying it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are times where an apple with peanut butter is going to serve me better. So it's asking, how is the food going to serve you? What food do you need to serve you best in this moment?
Awesome.